Hello, this is Bob, and I'll be reading the Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025 edition of the Fall River Herald News. Today's weather will be mostly sunny and warmer, 76 to 83 for a high, 50 to 57 for a low. On Wednesday, we're looking at hazy sun, 77 to 84 for a high, 52 to 59 for a low. Thursday, we're looking at heavy thunderstorms around, 87 to 94 for a high, 60 to 67 for a low. Friday, again, occasional showers and a thunderstorm, 76 to 83 for a high, 60 to 67 for a low. And Saturday, rain and thunderstorms around, 69 to 76 for a high, 56 to 63 for a low. The sun rose this morning at 5:12 and it sets tonight at 8:14. The first article on the front page is entitled, City to Spend $55,000 on Armory Study. Castle-like structure has fallen into disrepair. What to do with the old Bank Street Armory is once again top of mind for city officials, while the castle-like structure continues to idle in disrepair, but a new feasibility study may help Fall River find a use for it. In December 2024, the New York City-based American Numismatic Society had been considering the Armory at 72 Bank Street with a vision to restore and preserve the interior, outfitting the building into a museum dedicated to rare coins, currency, metals, and other related artifacts. Now that offer has just about slipped away. In an interview, Mayor Paul Coogan revealed that the ANS settled on Toledo, Ohio, citing significantly lower costs when deciding where to relocate their expansive 800,000-piece collection and educational programming. In January 2024, the City Council rejected a proposal to develop the 127-year-old historic structure, previously home to a volunteer militia, the National Guard, then Greater Fall River Recreation and Youth Build, when the building came under city ownership in 1976 into market-rate housing. At the time, local developer Alan McCumber offered to pay $200,000 for the property and create 37 market-rate housing units. But this idea was ultimately struck down by city councilors, the public, and the Historical Commission. The Armory has been proposed for a combination of uses: a space for veterans, as a tourist hub, or recreationally as an arts or event venue, while allowing the city to pursue grants and endowments to make over the building. More recently, the Historical Commission and the Preservation Society of Fall River were tasked with finding a purpose for the fortress look-alike, which has doubled as the city's attic, where stray street lamps, utility poles, and Christmas decorations can be found. The Redevelopment Authority at one time thought of taking it over, but eventually backed out. Allowing the Historical Commission to take the building wasn't highly favored, as then the city would forfeit the authority to sell it. At a May 27th City Council meeting, by an emergency preamble to expedite their vote, the councilors approved the use of $55,000 in Community Preservation Act funding from the CPA's undesignated fund balance to be used by the CPA Historic Resources Preservation Projects to conduct a feasibility study and assessment of the Armory. Councilors mentioned that a feasibility study had been conducted in 2015, the same year the city-owned structure was shuttered due to loose granite being found in one of the chimneys. At the time, the Coogan administration estimated the cost of repairing the interior would exceed $10 million, though the city recently had spent $35,000 to shore up leaks in the roof. Coogan reasoned that he's all for getting more eyes in that building to see what can be done with it, though it is still unclear whether development is the answer. The latest request for an alternative use sought to enhance the city's efforts to attract residents interested in an urban lifestyle. Not all councilors were in opposition to redeveloping the old armory, with City Councilor Bradford L. Kilby remarking that the appropriated funding ought to be a last-step effort when considering alternatives. The second front-page article is entitled, "A Shot of the Past. Reenactors Open Fire for Battle of Fall River Remembrance." On the lawn of Heritage State Park, a man in colonial-era breeches and tricorn hat led a pack of small boys, all holding muskets, as they raced towards a group of fleeing, cowardly British redcoats. "Back, you Tories!" the man shouted. One of the redcoats fell to the grass, shot dead by a boy's musket ball. A moment later, the British soldier ran back to the tent of the 54th Regiment of Foot, where he and his comrades were stationed. The Battle of Fall River reenactment weekend filled the park on May 31st, with dozens of people living 18th century history and hundreds of spectators enjoying the trip back in time. The camp would be open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. again on June 1st, with many of the reenactors sleeping overnight in tents on the lawn. A lot of people have shown up, said David Jennings, president of the Lafayette Durfee House, who organized the two-day event. "So far, everything is going well. I know from past experience that things go sideways at the last minute, but everything's holding up." If the British soldier on the lawn had been genuinely shot, he might have sought medical treatment from Olivia LeGros, portraying a nurse with the Rehoboth Minutemen Company. Setting aside her iPhone, LeGros showed off the tools of her grim trade: a box for leeches, a set of iron pliers and forceps for pulling musket balls out of flesh, a grinder used to drill through skulls to relieve pressure in the brain. "My husband's out in the battlefield with the wounded," she said. "I'm not really allowed to touch much of this stuff." Still, she had a wealth of knowledge regarding the late 1700s medicine, showing off period-accurate tourniquets that looked more like torture devices, and a bottle of catnip, not for a feline friend, but because it calms children down. The event featured many people like her, who are keeping the old ways alive. In tents on the lawn and inside the Heritage State Park Visitor Center, leather workers, printmakers, lace makers, and more plied their crafts as fascinated onlookers watched and asked questions. Dean Rance of Rock Village Forge in Middleborough pumped the bellows to stoke a fire and struck a long piece of iron against an anvil, creating a delicate curlicue. On a table before him were hand-forged iron brackets, fireplace tools, square nails, and more. When asked how he got into blacksmithing, he said, "It got more into me. I grew up in a family that had tools and things. My father did woodwork, and I wanted to do something a little bit different." After a few minutes of clanging hammer against iron, his project was complete. He'd made himself a rack to hang up his coat. Elsewhere on the grounds, Fred Voigt had started a fire for the women of Ye Old Lebanon Town Militia of Lebanon, Connecticut, who would be cooking dinner for the entire camp in Dutch ovens over an open flame. He said they'd already baked their own bread and churned butter. Steve Senna, the militia's captain, said the group is in its 9th year, with demonstrations of everything from beekeeping to the criminal justice system, a set of stocks. The militia is a family affair, with his daughter Mary portraying a washerwoman and his son a gunsmith. Senna said he became interested in historical reenactment when homeschooling his son. We do about 25 events a year. This is the furthest east we've ever been, Senna said. Some members of his militia are from Cape Cod, he said, so it's nice to do some events out this way. The most obvious thing that separates the reenactors from the visitors is the clothes. Among the reenactors, there are no jeans nor flip-flops. They wear breeches, baggy shirts, heavy dresses, bonnets, and caps. Emily Stringham of Vermont, who owns At the Sign of the Golden Scissors clothing shop and millinery, said she came to historical reenactment through museum work. Everything I do is hand-sewn, and I do it that way because it's how it was done at the time period, and because so much of what I do is for educational purposes. She said, I like to try to recreate as closely as possible within the means of modern materials. She has a particular interest in women's history, not only in colonial times, but throughout American history, even portraying a member of the Waves at the battleship Massachusetts. The clothing is especially significant for people like Seth Sciarro, regimental sergeant major of the 54th Regiment of Foot, wearing a full British regular uniform, a bright red coat with rows of real silver buttons, each debossed with the number 54. This is all handmade by Stephen Gardner. He's the commanding officer of the 54th Regiment of Foot, and he's spent many years in the hobby since the bicentennial, Sciarro said. Everything that's visible is all hand-sewn. Minus our socks and our shirt, everything else is made by one gentleman. In the early afternoon, the British and colonial reenactors met in the field of battle. The colonists holding their territory by the Blount seafood food truck, while the British were dug in near Tuckafied. Spectators lined the grass as the British regulars kept a tight formation, while the colonials, dressed in more ragtag fashion, held off the invaders. For about a half hour they fired muskets at each other in turn, without ammo, of course, sending clouds of smoke into the crowd and ringing people's ears. From time to time, colonial reenactors dropped to the grass. Women in period dress scurried onto the field to tend their wounds and cover their faces to keep the sun out of their eyes. At the first British casualty, the crowd clapped, happy to see the early Americans get one over on the English. A few more redcoats fell. They got the drummer, someone nearby said. Now they're in trouble. And a few more exchanges of gunfire, and the battle was over. The Battle of Fall River reenactment weekend continued Sunday. It was co-sponsored by the City of Fall River and Viva Fall River, with support from the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Fall River Cultural Council, and St. Anne's Credit Union. This next article is entitled, Twice Daily Flights from New Bedford to Boston is Coming. Cape Air has announced a new twice-daily, year-round passenger service between New Bedford Regional Airport and Logan International Airport in Boston. The 35-minute gate-to-gate flights from New Bedford to Boston are scheduled to depart daily at 8:15 a.m. and 2 p.m., with return flights from Boston scheduled for 1 p.m. and 6:40 p.m., according to a press release. The new flights are scheduled to begin on September 29th, and passengers can purchase tickets starting today on Cape Air's website, www.capeair.com. A check of the website shows one-way tickets for at least $94.50. It will be the first time in recent memory that area residents will have direct air access to Logan International Airport without having to battle Boston area road congestion and high parking rates, according to the release. Local passengers will be able to pass through TSA security checkpoints in New Bedford rather than in Boston, making it easier to connect to domestic and international flights departing from Logan, according to the release. Parking is $10 per day at New Bedford Regional Airport. New Bedford Regional Airport manager Scott Service said during a February meeting with city councilors that they had started working with the Transportation Security Administration for re-federalized security at New Bedford Airport. He said having the TSA checkpoint also helps us with trying to solicit new airlines, new service, and getting new passengers through the buildings. Assistant Airport Manager Michael Crane told councilors the wonderful benefit to that would be to park in New Bedford, clear TSA with only a handful of other passengers, fly to Boston, and you're already past security, so you don't have to deal with Boston traffic or Boston TSA. Cape Air's investment signals a strong commitment to both the New Bedford Regional Airport and the city, Mayor John Mitchell said in the release. The prospect for getting to Logan without Boston traffic or waiting in a long security line is sure to attract customers, and with it more interest, business, and economic momentum to our airport. This new nonstop service between New Bedford and Boston Logan is a game changer for travelers across southern New England, said Linda Markham, Cape Air president and CEO. We're re-eliminating the headaches of Boston traffic and long TSA lines and replacing them with convenience, connectivity, and affordability. Whether you're flying for business or leisure, to Boston or to Tokyo, this route makes the journey smoother from the very first mile. New Bedford and its airport are always looking to develop access to broader region and provide efficient, desirable services to the community. The Airport Commission is open to all partners in creating new air operations in all sectors, and Cape Air's new connection to Boston shows that New Bedford has opportunities to bring business to the city, New Bedford Airport Commission Chairman Matthew Provenencer said. New Bedford Regional Airport's best days are ahead. We're expecting more passengers this year with the new flights to Boston, and the increased interest will surely drive more carriers to explore opportunities in New Bedford, Service said. This next article is entitled, Prepare for Hurricanes Now, Forecasters Say. Knowing your risk can help with making a plan. No one could have foreseen how traumatic Hurricane Helene would be for so many people in so many states, but it underscores precisely why National Hurricane Center Director Michael Brennan stresses individual preparation for hurricane season, which began June 1st. The biggest thing people need to know is their own risk, from storm surge, wind, heavy rainfall, flooding, tornadoes, and rip currents, regardless of how far they live from a tropical storm or hurricane makes landfall, Brennan said. Helene and its aftermath, which killed 248 and caused almost $80 billion in damage, clearly demonstrated how destruction can occur miles inland or far from landfall. Getting ready for hurricane season is all about knowing that risk and starting the hurricane season ready for what that risk might be and how it might present itself to you, Brennan told USA Today about what people need to know and do as the season begins. With more than 200 million people facing hurricane risks in the United States, Brennan shared the following tips. Know whether you live in a storm surge zone. Then plan ahead. If you live in a storm surge zone, evacuation must be the basis of your hurricane preparedness plan, Brennan said. Consult your local government's website to find out if you live in an evacuation zone. It's important to understand you don't have to drive hundreds of miles to escape the danger of rapidly rising seawater. Most of the time, you can drive only tens of miles to get out of the storm surge evacuation zone, he said. In advance, ask friends and relatives who live nearby but away from the surge threat if you could stay with them. The other option is to plan to get to a safe hotel that gets you away from the storm surge threat, where you can ride out the storm and then deal with the aftermath, Brennan said. Start planning now what you would do for your pets, elderly relatives, and other people who might have medical devices, medical conditions, or other special needs. Next is to understand your flood risk. It can flood anywhere it can rain. It doesn't even have to rain where you are, Brennan said, adding it can just rain hard upstream, and if you're on a waterway, that water could rise and flood you out of your home. Freshwater flooding from rainfall has killed more people in tropical storms or hurricanes over the last 9 or 10 years in the United States than any other hazard, he said. Helene is an unfortunate example of that. Of the 175 people who died as a direct result of Helene's winds and rain, 95 lost their lives because of freshwater flooding, he said. If you live in a flood-prone area, even inland along a creek or a stream, have an evacuation plan for yourself and your family if you are threatened. Have flood insurance. Remember that homeowners insurance doesn't usually cover flood damage. Next, don't judge one storm by any previous storm. If you think you've seen the worst where you live from flooding or wind, it is almost positively not the worst, Brennan said. It's likely that the events you've seen are only a small piece of what could actually happen. Don't base your response or decision to evacuate based on what happened during the last storm. Take each storm on its own and try not to compare, he said. You could have a very similar storm on a similar track, but during a different time of year or different conditions, and it could make a huge difference in what happens where you live. There were a lot of people that died in Hurricane Katrina along the Mississippi coast because they survived Camille in 1969, and they thought nothing could ever be worse. But Katrina was worse, and people didn't leave, he said. Next, don't delay your preparation. The most powerful hurricanes that have hit the United States have all formed and made landfall within 3 or 4 days, Brennan said. Even Helene last year went from not even a tropical depression to making landfall within 3 or 4 days after it rapidly intensified. Have that plan in place for yourself and your family now, he said. You could have a storm really develop and threaten you within just a couple of days, and that's not the time to develop your hurricane plan. That's when you want to put the plan into practice. Next, don't focus on seasonal outlooks. If you're in a hurricane-prone area, you have to be ready every year, regardless of whether we're expecting an average season, below average, or above average. That risk is there for everyone every year, he said. We had 3 hurricane landfalls in Florida last year, 5 along the Gulf Coast. We've had 25 hurricane landfalls in the United States since 2017. Pay attention to the hazards, not the category. We have lots of products to tell people what their risk is from wind, storm surge, and from heavy rainfall flooding, Brennan said. The mix of those hazards is going to vary from storm to storm and from location to location within the same storm. You really have to drill down and find that information. A slow-moving tropical storm can cause deadly flooding even without ever becoming a hurricane. And a fast-moving storm like Helene can carry higher winds much further inland. A storm making landfall along the Gulf Coast can cause dangerous flooding in the mid-Atlantic states, like we saw with Ida back in 2021, he said. Ida made landfall in Louisiana, but most of the fatalities were up in New York and New Jersey from freshwater flooding days later and hundreds of miles away from landfall. Find your trusted sources of information. Make sure you know where to find authoritative information in terms of evacuations and other safety information. Brennan said make those decisions now ahead of the storm. Find your trusted media, your local National Weather Service office, or your state and local government officials, and follow them on social media. Finally, don't forget to plan for after the storm. When deciding whether to evacuate, consider what life could be like after the storm. Does anyone in your home rely on electricity for medical devices or to keep medicine refrigerated? Do you have a generator? And do you know how to use it safely? And this next article is entitled Aluminum Premium for U.S. Buyers Soars. The United States imports around half the steel and aluminum used in the country to make items ranging from cars and airplanes to soft drink cans. Premiums for consumers buying aluminum on the physical market in the United States soared on June 2nd after President Donald Trump said he planned to increase tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50% from 25%. About half of all aluminum used in the United States for transport, packaging, and construction is delivered from elsewhere, with the vast majority coming from Canada. The new tariffs are due to take effect on June 4th. Buyers on the physical market usually pay the London Metal Exchange benchmark aluminum price plus a premium covering taxes, transport, and handling costs. The U.S. Midwest duty-paid aluminum premium reached 58 cents per pound, or $1,279 a metric ton on June 2nd. That was a 54% jump from May 30th and a 164% growth since the start of 2025. Part of the June 2nd growth was amplified by it being the first trading day of the new month, when regional premiums often make a strong move. Goldman Sachs said the premium would need to rise to between 68 cents and 70 cents per pound to fully reflect the 50% import tariff. It has been 45 years since anyone built a primary aluminum smelter in the U.S. Emirates Global Aluminum said in May it would invest $4 billion in construction of an aluminum plant in the United States, with the first metal expected by the end of the decade. The plant would have an annual production capacity of 600,000 metric tons. For comparison, the United States imported 2.7 million tons of unwrought aluminum from Canada last year. Steel and aluminum tariffs were among the earliest put into effect by Trump when he returned to office in January. The original tariffs of 25% on most steel and aluminum imported to the United States went into effect in March. And we've reached the end of our time. Once again, today's weather will be mostly sunny and warmer, 76 to 83 for a high, 50 to 57 for a low, and we're looking for even warmer tomorrow, hazy sun, 77 to 84 for a high, 54 to 59 for a low. This has been Bob reading the Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025 edition of the Fall River Herald. Thank you very much for listening, and you have a pleasant day.